I really don't like this theory. I think at its best, it's just some interesting parallels between two parallel stories, and at its worst, it's damn near extreme epiphania. Notice how neither of those two descriptors were theory, because it really isn't a theory. It really is just parallel searching. And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you start calling it something that it's not, that's when problems start to arise. When you call this a theory, you start doing more than you have to. A theory, by definition, is supposed to explain something. And in the sense of the story, it should be proving something narratively, or explaining something we don't currently have an answer to. I've never seen a clear explanation of what this ordering is actually supposed to mean for Deltarune's narrative. You ask, okay, but what does that mean for the story? And they shut down like Heath's Flamesman when you forget his name, because they've all been tricked into believing that it's actually a theory. What do these arbitrary parallels for completely different things each chapter mean for the story? What's the reasoning for each Dark World being a reverse order of Deltarune? Well, nobody knows. It's such an easy theory to poke holes into its logic, and I'm gonna explain why. For reference, I'm using a few popular variants of this theory I found on Reddit. The main one I found has over 1,600 upvotes on the Deltarune subreddit. I won't be linking it because I don't want to send any hate to this person, because there really is nothing wrong with finding interesting parallels. I'm just here to tell you that it's not a theory. But if you do want to find it, just look up reverse Undertale theory, you'll find it. It's pretty high up there. So let's go over this theory. Chapter 1, New Home. So naturally, the theory begins with Chapter 1's Dark World paralleling New Home. And I'll give props due, they do acknowledge that New Home is the weakest link in the theory. You fight a king in both as the main boss, and they're both monochromatic castles. I mean, sure, that's fair, but that really only works when you ignore like 80% of Chapter 1. Chapter 1 isn't just Card Castle. New Home is a pretty short area in Undertale, so this part only works if you just focus on Card Castle. But Chapter 1 has the Field of Hopes and Dreams, and Scarlet Forest, and hell, even Castletown makes its first appearance here, so that should be important. So you have to do a lot of ignoring of Chapter 1 to make this one work. Chapter 2 parallels the core. Now that's the part that really makes it fall apart to me. To make this theory work, they're forcing the core to be a separate location. Undertale itself doesn't even consider the core to be a separate section of the game. It's one continuous traverse from Hotland through the core, which is within Hotland. The core is still considered Hotland in the save menu, and the core doesn't have a separate main boss because Mettaton continues his arc until the finale at the end of the core. On top of that, in Genocide Route, the kill counter is shared. There's no unique kill counter for the core because once you exhaust it in Hotland, the core will be cleared out as well. So if you ignore the glaring fact that core is narratively and mechanically a location within Hotland and not its own place, we can continue observing the theory. So the core, a high-tech area, and Chapter 2's Dark World is also high-tech. Man, I guess. You're also sort of ignoring the fact that this high-tech area also happens to be a field, and a city, and a mansion. To make this parallel work, you kinda have to look at Chapter 2 really far away and cut off a good couple of major locations. The core is a machine. While I certainly agree that they do have similar design elements, they're both very blue, and they're both based on technology. But of course that comparison's gonna work because high tech is already such a broad description. Now there's a trend here that I actually think is quite strong in terms of parallels, and that's the soul modes being reverse parallels. However, even that can have holes poked into it, which I'll get to in a bit. But the secret boss of Chapter 2 is Spamton Neo, who uses the Yellow Soul mode, paralleling with Mettaton, who also uses the Yellow Soul mode in Undertale. Also, in Genocide Route, you would have to fight Mettaton Neo, which parallels good with Spamton Neo. That's good. Those are strong parallels there, perhaps some of the strongest in the entire theory. Moving on to Chapter 3. Now again, we're gonna have to ignore the fact that Undertale recognizes Core and Hotland as one location, because if they did, we would go from New Home paralleling Chapter 1 to Hotland supposedly paralleling Chapter 2, and by now we would be on Waterfall, but since we're counting them as separate, this represents Hotland. Both Mettaton and Tenna are TV stars, and that's another strong parallel right there. Just like Mettaton, Tenna interrupts the player many times with various game shows and mini games. You know, they both do that. There's a cooking segment shared between them, which would be a strong parallel, but I would say that says more about the stuff that Toby Fox is watching on TV than it does about a TV world and a Hotland parallel. The Mettaton news outfit is the same colors as Tenna's outfit. Like, we're just scraping the bottom of the barrel at that one. Now, remember how I said that I thought the strongest part of these parallels were the soul modes being in reverse? Well, yeah, even that falls apart, because there's no unique soul mode usage in Chapter 3, which is crazy because it realistically could have had 3 separate options when you're considering this to be Hotland's equivalent. You could have made the argument for any of these. Not that making arguments to support this theory is hard. Look, that's the same water cooler. That means Deltarune is Undertale in reverse. So realistically, if we're considering Chapter 3 to parallel Hotland, it should have a battle that uses the purple soul mode. Because if you're considering Core and Hotland to be separate locations, then the big boss of Hotland happens to be Muffet, who uses the purple soul mode. But Chapter 3 doesn't use a purple soul mode. It also could have maybe reused the yellow soul mode, because again, Mettaton uses the yellow soul. And then you could have the parallel, you know, Tenna and Spamton have a link together, but okay, they didn't use the yellow soul mode either. Even if TV World had like some orange and light blue lasers that you had to pass through, like you could make the argument for that too, because Hotland has both of those lasers. That would have been fine. But there's just none of that. They don't do any of that in Chapter 3. And I bring up the orange and light blue, and yellow as well, because they're represented in Hotland. But specifically on the purple soul, some people think that because Muffet was a guest character in Undertale, it means that the purple soul won't be returning as a soul mode in Deltarune. I don't think that's a valid reason to say that the purple soul won't be there. The purple soul itself isn't intrinsically linked to Muffet. She doesn't have to appear for us to see the purple soul mode. Just like we saw the yellow soul mode before even seeing a sprite for Mettaton in Deltarune. And it's not a rights issue either. The purple soul exists with or without Muffet. And again, Deltarune literally makes references to her too. I think using the whole rights character thing to discredit the purple soul not being there is just sloppy damage control. It's just sloppy damage control used to keep making this theory make sense, when it is a large hole in the theory that Chapter 3 has nothing for the soul. It had 3 options. If the theory heavily relies on the soul mode progression, then Chapter 3 not having a corresponding soul mode is at least evidence against the pattern. Explaining it away by inventing exceptions after the fact kinda weakens the predictive power of this so-called theory. Moving on to Chapter 4, there's a ton of water in the sanctuaries, just like Waterfall. The entire concept of Chapter 4 is learning of the prophecy, and there are ancient prophecies written on the walls of Waterfall. Both very, very strong parallels, I'll give it that. The piano puzzles are often something used as a strong parallel as well, but when you use that as a parallel, I think you're really overselling the piano in Undertale. Like, it's a single room, and it's not a puzzle. It's 100% optional, and it's ultimately used for a joke. So that's supposed to be your ultimate parallel in Chapter 4. The fact that you're using pianos in a church world, big surprise there. But it's also supposed to parallel to an optional joke room in Undertale. I think that parallel might work better if the piano was required to progress in Undertale. And the strongest parallel of them all is probably Gerson Boom. And the focus on his character in Chapter 4, not only is he a character that only appears in Waterfall, but he too has a secret battle that uses the soul mode of Waterfall, being the green soul mode. So in the end, Chapter 4 is probably the strongest of them all when you're looking for parallels between certain Undertale locations. Okay, so those were some of the parallels of this reverse Undertale theory. Some good, some bad, and we still have literally no answer as to why it's structured like this. Okay, but what about future chapters? We have 3 left, and by the current standards of the reverse Undertale theory, Chapter 5 would have to parallel Snowdin. which again I think already conceptually sounds like a weak parallel, but I'm gonna hold off on that for now because we have a bigger problem at hand. So if Chapter 5 represents Snowdin, then naturally Chapter 6 would represent Ruins. And Chapter 7 would represent... Yeah, that's right. Ruins is the first location of Undertale. Keep in mind, this is with us already splitting a location that Undertale has as a single location into 2 separate chapters, and we still can't fit all the locations into Deltarune chapters. Of the popular versions of this theory, people will say True Lab, because we assume by Chapter 7 we have to see some gases or shenanigans, but that doesn't fit the theory, because True Lab comes before New Home, so if anything, Chapter 2 should have been True Lab. The theory factually isn't reverse Undertale theory anymore by this logic. It's reverse Undertale theory, but True Lab is at the end, even though it's the second to last location in Undertale, so we can't just throw True Lab at the end. Another popular version of the theory says that the surface will be represented as the 7th chapter of Deltarune. And again, this has its issues. The surface is very vague as it pertains to Undertale. By the ordering logic of reverse theory, we'd have to be talking about the surface from before Frisk fell down into the underground, which not only isn't a location you can explore, it's a location we barely see at all. Okay, so what if it's the surface from the end of the pacifist route? And sure, but still, we can't explore it, it's a single room, and again, it breaks the reverse order that the theory needs so bad, because the surface should have been represented by Chapter 1 if we're using that. You see the issue here? I don't think every one of these parallels are made up necessarily. I think a good couple of them are real and intentional. My issue is that a collection of parallels isn't automatically a theory. A theory should explain something, or give us a better understanding of the story. This one, in my view, mostly catalogs similarities, and that simply isn't a theory. Moreover, I think that finding these parallels doesn't necessarily prove that there's a set order to them. You can find parallels across the board in general. To prove that you can draw existing parallels from Undertale and Deltarune and start to form an arbitrary ordering theory, I'm gonna do the same exact thing, but in reverse. I call it the Forward Undertale Theory. Chapter 1. Goat Royalty introduces you to this strange new world in both. Both Toriel and Rousey want you to interact with a dummy to explain the battle system, and both of them implore you to use non-violence to complete these battles. There's a bake sale in Chapter 1 ran by Hathy, Rudin, and Lancer and Susie, and just like that one, there's a bake sale ran by spiders in the ruins of Undertale. And what do you know? They both sell donuts. Hathy sells heart donuts, and the spiders sell... well, spider donuts. Both Chapter 1 and Undertale's ruins share purple theming with red leaves. Red leaves populate most of ruins, that there's just a bunch of them on the ground, and there happens to be plenty of red trees with red leaves in Chapter 1's Dark World. I think Toriel and the king have an inverse relationship. Toriel seriously does not want to fight the fallen child, she wants them to stay with her and not continue through the underground because she cares so deeply about humans that fall down. King, on the other hand, has such a deep, profound hatred of Lightners that his main goal is to kill the Delta Warriors, not to mention the fact that you're technically facing royalty in both battles, albeit former royalty in Toriel's case. Chapter 2 is Snowdin. Hey, here's a kicker. The reindeer character of Deltarune. You know, the reindeer with antlers associated with the cold and snowy weather? The reindeer that appeared in Snowdin in the anniversary stream appears as a playable character in this chapter. That sounds important. The Dark World takes place in a location that is shared between Deltarune's Light World and Snowdin, which happens to be the library. The main plot surrounds two antagonists that focus on their goal of trying to capture a specific character. Like Queen wants to capture Noelle, and Papyrus wants to capture the human. The annoying dog makes its first appearance in Chapter 2 of Deltarune, who is most strongly associated with Snowdin. That long-ass word from Monster Kid's word search, which was in Snowdin, also appears as a puzzle in Deltarune Chapter 2. Snowgrave! The entire weird route has you use ice magic that ends in a fatal Snowgrave. So far, this is the only chapter to use such a severe move that uses snow, which you could say parallels the sheets of snow in Snowdin. Chapter 3. You could say that the game board puzzles that use the wooden planks to make bridges parallel Waterfall's flower puzzles where you throw flowers into the water and they bloom to make bridges for you. Both game boards you play on Chapter 3 have a focus on water. Game board 1 with the Oasis, and game board 2, you literally have to use a raft to float on the water. Both end off with you fighting a daunting armored enemy. Chapter 3 has the Roaring Night, and Waterfall ends on Undyne. Oh yeah, who shows up at the end of Chapter 3? I forgot. Oh, that's right, it's Undyne from Waterfall and Undertale. Chapter 4, Hotland. The water cooler of Hotland also shares the Mizzle water coolers. The most expensive item you can get from the donation pool is the Gold Widow, which directly references Muffet, who is the boss of Hotland. Gerson is writing a letter that he wants Susie to give in Chapter 4. In Undertale, Undyne wants you to bring a letter to Hotland. In terms of how you travel, Hotland and the Sanctuaries are the two closest. They both are incredibly towering structures that you're basically constantly climbing higher and higher. But in Hotland, you just use elevators. But the point still stands. They're looming areas of both games and you're constantly moving up. Chapter 4's final Light World segment ends with The Place Where It Rained, which directly parallels its Raining Somewhere Else, which happens to play in Hotland of Undertale. So all of those parallels. And you know what I found? Absolutely nothing! I found all those parallels and yet nothing about them proves that there's a reason to that ordering, or that there's any story or narrative reasoning behind it. And I even did it without making any strange rules or exceptions. Take that reverse Undertale theory. There are clear intentional parallels. But I sincerely don't think that each chapter is trying to parallel a specific Undertale location as a whole. Going back to Chapter 5, Asgore is already first in line to be the main guy of the chapter. Based on the Field of Pink and Gold line from Gerson, Asgore being the flower man trapped in Asylum from the Prophecy, and the areas and enemies in the teasers we've seen all have a floral or plant vibe to them. But why is it Japanese? So none of this really screams Snowden like reverse Undertale theory seemingly predicts. If anything, seeing as how Asgore is supposed to have the core focus, wouldn't that mean it strongly parallels New Home? All these flowers just like in the throne room. We even see an Omega Flowey bullet pattern in the trailer. And I know that this is really stretching it, but the balloons in the festival are even used in New Home in the Undertale anniversary stream. I know I made it as a joke, but considering the fact that I see Hotland and Core as one location, and in my forwards Undertale theory Chapter 4 parallels Hotland, Chapter 5 would parallel New Home. That lines up pretty well with what we've seen already for Chapter 5. I'm not saying I believe that stupid theory that I made. I don't believe forward Undertale theory. I just think it's funny that we're heading in that direction. Or, you know, maybe Carol Holiday will make a dark fountain after Asgore and the whole world will turn into ice. That'll be suffice to say that it's a Snowden parallel or something. But you don't even need to go that far, because the baseline for what qualifies as quote-unquote evidence for this theory is in the toilet. Let's just say that there's major Snowgrave relevance, which there very likely will be. Supporters of that theory are going to use that as a major plot of evidence for Chapter 5 being a Snowden parallel, while simultaneously ignoring the fact that Snowgrave starts in Chapter 2. Because if you acknowledge that, that hurts the pattern. Parallels are naturally going to exist between these two games, because that's exactly what they are. They're parallel stories, and it's fun to find them when they actually exist. There's parallels across the board, but just because you find a bunch of parallels doesn't mean it explains anything. Deltarune is its own game, and until someone can give me a valid reasoning to prove that Deltarune is Undertale in reverse, I'm gonna keep discrediting this theory as just a collection of observations without narrative reasoning. Wow, that was a lot. I hope I didn't sound too hateful there. I do think it's fun to find parallels, but I'm just sick and tired of people calling this a theory. There's nothing that explains them altogether. I hope you liked the video. Drop a like, maybe a subscribe, or drop a comment. Tell me why you believe this theory, or why you don't believe this theory, or whatever crackpot theory you guys have. I'd love to hear it. Anyways, I've been an Angry Onion, and I'll see you in the next one.